Director of Product Solutions here at Fortinet, and I'll be your host today. With me, I have two of our distinguished fellow employees, Derek Menke and Amar Lakash. So with that, I'll turn it over to Derek and Amar to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Peter. So Derek Menke here. I'm Chief of Security Insights and our Global Threat Alliances with FortiGuard Labs. Been with Fortinet for over 15 years, so a seasoned veteran here at Fortinet and FortiGuard Labs, and really happy to be here to have a good discussion with another one of my seasoned colleagues, Amar, and I'll pass it over to you, Amar.
Hey, thanks, Derek, and thanks, Peter. So Amar Lakhani here, being with Fortinet for about 5 years. I am a security strategist and a senior red team researcher. My specialty is looking at offensive attacks and cybercrime.
Thanks, guys. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the questions. So to start off, Derek, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on at FortiGuard Labs?
Sure. Yeah. So FortiGuard Labs is a nonstop, around the clock, 24/7, 365 operation. I joined in 2004. We had around 10 analysts in the labs back then. We were doing graveyard shifts because that's all that mattered at the time. So to cover the threat landscape, we're doing antivirus updates only 2 times per day. Now, if you look at, the threat landscape that will be that we'll be discussing today, that's so fluid and dynamic, we've had to adjust a lot, right? And we're continuing to adapt and adjust, especially in today's climate. We've grown to over 235 headcount around the globe. We have established labs now across the Americas, EMEA, Asia Pacific as well. And so, we're doing several operations. Of course, our mandate is customer protections and the security fabric. So we have experts behind each service, such as antivirus, intrusion prevention, web filtering, anti-spam. All the definition updates is being handled by our world-class service team and our Fortinet distribution network. So antivirus is going out every hour now. Web filtering every 5 minutes, as an example. This is a real-time, living, breathing network that's powered by our in-house experts, but also our automation and our machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions as well. So it's a very, very active network. On top of that, we're also, when it comes to my team, we're handling our threat intelligence as well within FortiGuard Labs. So we're researching, analyzing all the samples that are coming in. We're doing threat hunting. We're doing data science and reporting, like our quarterly threat landscape reports that we release, our threat signals as an example, anything that you can find published on FortiGuard.com. All the real-time intelligence telemetry data that's coming also in from our teams, and finally our threat alliances, right? When we need to share breaking information with Cyber Threat Alliance, with law enforcement such as Interpol, with other peers in the industry, that's also being driven by FortiGuard Labs. So we could talk for days about it because there is a lot of material, but I'll stop there, and hopefully that gives a little bit of an update. And Amar, maybe you want to talk about a little bit what you're doing also in terms of research within FortiGuard Labs.
Yeah, so on top of everything you mentioned, Derek, one of the things that we try and do is get into the mind of the attacker. And how we do that is we're actually on all the Darknet forums, all the hacker forums, foreign websites, and we're looking at the techniques that attackers are talking about. We're looking at the techniques and programming, concepts that they're putting into the latest malware, into their attacks, into their remote access toolkits. And we're also trying to duplicate that to understand the logic behind that. Anyone can really write a way to stop one specific attack, but we're trying to understand what the logic behind that attack is so we can stop any type of attack that uses that same logic. So on top of that, we're pretty well versed, I would say, onto the dark side of the web, right? And we're looking into that very, very deeply all the time.
Well, we're glad that you guys are wearing the white hats, because it sounds like you could be pretty dangerous if you decide to do something else. So it's always impressive to me to hear everything that FortiGuard Labs is doing. So what do you see in all this, looking at the market, everything that's going on? How's changing now in this new pandemic reality?
Yeah, so obviously with this new reality, it's dominating our everyday lives, the news cycles, and it's no exception when it comes to the threat landscape. The threat landscape, it's a cyber world, a virtual world. It naturally follows in parallel the path that the physical world is taking. It's the same thing with crime in the real world. Cyber crime follows, tries to capitalize on social engineering, on fear and anxiety, on topical events and markets and so forth, right? And attack surface opportunities. So that attack surface is changing now. That's at a high level. That's one of the big things we're seeing, obviously, with people going to work. And this telework force, that's a big shift in a lot of things, but particularly with the attack surface. I mean, when we talk about attack surface, we talk about everything, right? We talk about people, we talk about locations of people, we talk about applications and protocols, and vulnerabilities that follow that. And that's certainly, if you look at if you look at workstations that were typically within corporate safeguards that are now gone to home office, there's a lot of policies that have to adapt to that. And there's also attack opportunities that are happening on these. So we can definitely get into more detail. I just wanted to talk about that at a high level. The other thing I'm talking about recently is, again, in this parallel analogy, is if you look at the buzzwords of the day, right? The quote unquote new normal, and also flattening the curve. We're trying to do the same thing when it comes to cybersecurity, right? We need to flatten this curve because there is a big surge and increase in attacks. We're not doing that yet because the attacks are significantly jumping right now. So we can talk about that. Cyber viruses, computer viruses, cyber viruses, call it what you will, are very similar to human viruses. So when we talk about what's happening with the coronavirus and COVID-19 in terms of physical vulnerabilities, the same thing is also happening on a cyber level. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, Derek, just to kind of add to that. I mean, a couple of things that we've seen, historically, most organizations hadn't planned for such a large remote workforce. Their cybersecurity policies, their products, everything that they've done to protect themselves was basically based on the organization, and very little was based on such a large amount of remote workforce. I mean, so I think they're starting to find out, how to protect against that. And there's things that are coming back we had not seen for a bit, such as things like VPN hijacking, session hijacking, watering hole attacks. So I think that's pretty interesting. I liked how you made a little bit of similarities between what's happening with infectious diseases as well as malware viruses. I mean, they kind of have a little bit of the same life cycle. They have a incubation period, right? I mean, whether it's 14 days or whether the latest reports say for hundreds of days a malware may be sitting on your network before you're detected. They both have consequences if they're not treated well or right away, or if you don't recognize that they're infecting your system. And at the same time, they can be pretty disastrous. But we also have had plans on how to treat both of these for a while. So I hate to make the comparison a little bit, but maybe it's easier for people to understand that, we're not, once again, dealing with something that's brand new. We're dealing with a new way of looking at it and a new way of attackers to exploit systems.
I guess that makes sense. You could look at the preventive measures you can take to reduce the number of infections, as well as the response you can take when those infections do happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why Derek said, let's try and, put down the curve of malware viruses. And we can do that by, all the things that we used to do, such as user awareness, such as having the same techniques and policies, such as even having segmentation. Very few companies have decided to put segmentation or products like network access control on the home network on the VPN, but those products and solutions have been available for a long time. And when they're not available, it does cause attackers an opportunity to exploit them.
And that's a great point. And these are things we've been talking about for years. So this is a great point. These are things we've been talking about for years, segmentation. And again, it's in my analogy to the physical world, what are we talking about? Social distancing. We've always talked about cyber distancing in the same way, being aware of who is approaching you, that they could potentially be compromising you, right? In terms of social engineering and phishing and attackers. And yeah, it's very much the same thing with segmentation too, especially in the world of IoT. Self-isolation, just like segmentation too, right? To prevent attacks and spread. It's the same thing the way computer worms operate. So it's, yeah, really good point, Amar.
So Derek, earlier you mentioned the issue of remote teleworking at scale happening more often at a high level. Do you want to dig in a little bit about what are those threats you're seeing there?
Yeah, so at a high level, like if I think about what is the risk now, obviously with a significant change in this, teleworkforce now, as I call it, comes with inherent risk. So the obvious example is obviously downtime. If we talk about denial of service, right? Right now, it's critical for revenue streams, for businesses and services to remain online. So I think it's been made clear, and a lot of people have talked about the infrastructure problem. Obviously, service providers are reporting up to a 40% increase in bandwidth and traffic. And that's just the inherent, with VPN usage as well, right? So that's just the inherent networking and infrastructure risk. But if you look at the OSI model and stack on security on top of that in applications, you now have people, right? You have these people that are at home in very busy networks, as Amar mentioned, that probably aren't segmented as the way they should be. So you have other rogue devices that could easily attack these devices, become compromised. So you have a slew of these risks now that are all happening at all these different endpoints instead of within the confines of let's say a properly segmented organization when people are within the office on dedicated workstations. When I think of when I think of that now, you have a much more vulnerable attack surface, right, with these risks. And to me, one of the largest risks I see with a more vulnerable attack surface is if the telework targets start to be taken out with ransomware, right? That's a big risk, obviously. We're starting to see specific ransomware attacks that are hitting end users, essentially causing denial of service for these people, their services and workstations. From a hacker's or an attacker's perspective, you're essentially cripple. You can essentially cripple an entire organization now by going after that teleworkforce. So to me, that's a big thing. And of course, you have other things that are inherent risks there, like intellectual property theft and so forth, hijacking, compromising of these endpoints. But these are new risks that are being presented for sure.
Yeah, Derek, I always tell people, if you're even right now, anyone listening to this webinar, if you're on the same network as, maybe your family member streaming like Netflix right now, you're doing it wrong. You're not keeping social distancing from your network device. So I think that's important. Also remember, attackers know this, right? Everyone knows everyone's working at home, so they realize that there's other ways to get into the network. Maybe even like phishing or social engineering through a gaming chat channel, which I've seen. So they may be targeting your kids or targeting streaming services or some other channel just to get to your corporate device, and they can do that. So there's a lot of there's a lot of technique and a lot of common sense I think we have to start using to segment even internally, and also keep safe internally, right? I mean, there's a lot of cloud-based services such as like DNS services, there's EDR, endpoint detection, that can keep corporate devices safe on a shared network.
Yeah, and I think that yeah, exactly. And again, to me, in my experience, meeting with, doing a lot of consulting for CSO, CXO worldwide, a lot of mature security operations centers, like I'm talking about bigger players, distributed enterprise models. They've set this up from a distributed enterprise perspective, including everything you talked about, Amar. Obviously secure Wi-Fi access points, VPNs being baked in, and things like managed EDR too, endpoint detection and response. And that's all good, but it's still far and few in between. If we talk about everything now that's scrambling to adopt this, I would say that's also what we're seeing in terms of this shift in the new climate that we're dealing with. So it's to all the points we talked about, I think it's really critical that all organizations, including even SMB to enterprise, get this right and do it quickly, because we're seeing a big surge in this attack activity and vulnerable targets.
Well, that attack using the gaming console chat channel sounds really interesting. Can you talk a bit other specific threats the FortiGuard Labs is seeing? Yeah,
so specifically, as I said, we have our own unique intelligence at FortiGuard Labs. We have a lot of it. Often it's finding the needle in the haystack, as we call it. We get over 100 billion events a day that we have to process. We have over 5 million firewalls shipped now worldwide. And it's not just firewalls, right? I mean, it's, if you look at our products, including Sandbox, EDR, so virtually end to end to cover that attack surface. I actually refer to it as the threat spectrum, because it's you can only protect against what you can see, and we have wide visibility into that when customers participate. We have about anywhere between 65 to 70% of our customers participating in this intelligence network. And so that's great, because it allows us to do algorithms, machine learning, and pick out what we're doing. And that's just on the operations on the back end. And we have to monitor this real time, and it's changing every day, to be honest, Peter. Just this week, we looked at some of the statistics to compare year-over-year models from January 2020 to February to March. If we looked at just virus activity alone in January, it's about a 13% increase. February, we're looking at a 52% increase. And in March, 131% increase in virus activity. And to me, that's a direct result also of this new attack surface, right? Why viruses? Well, we're seeing a lot of emails that are going around to end users that contain malicious attachments, a lot of emails that are impersonating health authorities, that are leveraging social engineering for this new COVID-19, this new crisis that we're in, and preying on that fear and anxiety. But again, typical attack chain, right? Send an email, get the user to open that email. It's a malicious PDF or a Word document that contains a remote access Trojan or a flavor of ransomware, an info stealer, flavor of ransomware. And that's really what we're seeing. And again, when I talk about those numbers, just imagine that curve, right? Going up from 13 to 52 to 131% is rising significantly. It's not flattening right now. That's a challenge we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing like hundreds of emails every day. I mean, phishing has always been a massive, target. Phishing emails is usually one of the most pervasive types of attacks that we see. But now everything is around COVID, and attackers know they can take advantage of people, take advantage of their emotion and passion. So we're seeing tons of COVID related emails, whether it's promising a cure or treatment or even just information around that. And those emails, those spam emails, those malicious emails will either have attachments, or there'll be phishing links, or they'll be trying to steal information. And, in the United States, specifically, we're starting to see emails directed around the stimulus checks as well, like, trying to steal your bank account information. FortiGuard Labs even recently just looked at a specific malware called TrickBot, and we have a lot of information on our blog about that and analysis. But there's been new variants of TrickBot that is specifically attacking Android devices, trying to steal banking information. Specifically, it's trying to intercept your two-factor authentication. It can steal SMS push notifications, or even if you have a two-factor third-party application, if it's pushing that two-factor code to you, it can start stealing that. So attackers are seeing that opportunity. Hey, how can I take advantage of this? And some of these attacks are extremely basic, right? I mean, not even a cyber attack. I got a call the other day, saying hey, we want to make sure we have your bank account correct. Can we verify your bank account and routing number so we can send you a stimulus check? I'm like, yeah, no, thank you, right? But those types of calls, I'm getting on emails as well, and we're seeing email threats as well. So really basic to, things that are more complicated and may involve ransomware or Trojans or rats, remote access toolkits, and other things as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So it's really a lot of the things that we've talked about, like if we look at the two-factor authentication stealing, I mean, that even 10 years ago, actually FortiGuard Labs did the first research on Zipmo, which was Zeus in a mobile, and that was the first mobile malware that was capable of stealing two-factor authentication. That was actually 11 years ago, I think, around 11 or 12 years ago. But to that point, it's just critical now. It's being amplified. Like the scope is much bigger. There's much more, people are much more vulnerable at this point. And so, yeah, it's a huge target, like Amar said, trying to really, from an attacker's game, to try to amplify that and use things like TrickBot, which is a well-known, piece of malware to do that. The other thing is, apart from the traditional email that we're seeing, as Amar mentioned, the SMS scams, so smishing as we call it, and then voice as well, phishing scams. Expect to see a lot more of those. I think a lot is still email born right now, but definitely there's a lot going on. Other things like that for our viewers to be aware of too.
Yeah, I also want to point out, it's not just like the home users. There's so many organizations that they're migrating to cloud or accelerating their cloud deployments at much faster than ever before. And, for example, we've seen organizations that are just putting in public RDP networks and devices. And you would think, why would that ever happen? Why would someone put RDP on the public network? And it may not even be like officially supported by the organization, but they may be like shadow IT and maybe maybe a group inside a larger organization that just wants to get access pretty fast. So we're seeing like a tremendous increase in these applications, these remote attacks, even cloud-based applications. I've talked to many customers and they're just deploying applications in the cloud, but they're not securing those applications. They're not securing their S3 buckets. They're not putting things behind a web application firewall. They're not looking at authentication, and they think they may be okay because they're in the cloud, but they're not testing. They're not pen testing in the cloud. They're not putting devices in the cloud, and it's leaving things open. So we're not only seeing this increase at home, which everyone's at home, but definitely like organizations are officially supporting cloud deployments for not being targeted as well.
Yeah, that's a great interesting point, Amar. It's tough. It's challenging. It's very tough because the RDP is a great example. If we look 2 years ago to WannaCry when that was breaking, and then that's the turn of blue and then Bluekeep. What was the security world preaching at that time? We're saying, don't open public access or RDP because it's going to allow things to spread. I mean, you're literally inviting attackers to come knocking on your door. I think that got better after time. People, were hardening the infrastructure, access to these publicly available ports. But now, because of this quick scramble, really, to shift to a telework presence. By nature of that, there's a lot more application traffic. There's a lot more ports being opened, including RDP. In fact, RDP is the #1 attacked vulnerability that we're seeing right now in FortiGuard Labs as an example. And it's opposite of what we were talking about 2 years ago, but it's just because of this climate, it's the direct effect. It's the reality that's happening. It's quite dangerous, actually, I would say, but it is the reality and something we gotta be aware of. The other thing too is, going back to kind of what we talked about with the wrist, Amar, you're talking about ransomware. So I think, for a couple of years now, I've been talking about targeted ransom attacks being something that is going to be on the uptick. We saw it last year. We saw, governments. We saw healthcare being targeted with even education as well being targeted with ransomware. So not just saying, hey, I encrypted your data, give me $500, saying that I've crippled your revenue streams, your accounts payable systems, account receivable systems, whatever it is, give us in the tune of 6 figures to 7 figures. I mean, we saw this affect up to $6-7 million. And unfortunately, I think we're going to start to see that happening on healthcare. People who are very vulnerable right now, who would scramble to pay money. And it's just completely wrong. This should not be happening. But again, attackers have no ethics, right? And unfortunately, I think we're going to start to see some of these attack targets too.
Yeah, even traditionally before this thing happened, the healthcare industry, at least some parts of it was always struggling, right? There was always that balance of like, do I spend money on research or patient services or IT and security, right? And sometimes IT and security unfortunately took a back seat, and so before we saw like hospitals like get attacked with ransomware, and God forbid it happens right now, but if it does, most people are not even going to think about it. Patient care is the number one priority, and attackers, if they know that or if they start targeting that, and getting inside some of these systems, they'll they're hoping to make some quick change.
Yeah. I
Any comments on the reported vulnerabilities with any of the video conference systems?
Yeah. So a juicy target, obviously. If we talk, that's just part of this. Peter, it all comes back to this attack surface I talked about. If you think about this new attack surface, again, thinking as an attacker, like we have to do in FortiGuard Labs to try to research this and stay on top of it, what are the new targets? So we already talked about the segmentation, the IoT devices, the remote workstations now, but part of the applications now that are being targeted are definitely video platforms, or just group conferencing platforms in general, because this is how people are having to adapt. Even television stations, right? I mean, there's no secret. Everybody's going to these platforms right now as their new daily routines. And so, yeah, for sure. There's a couple of things, right? We're seeing an increase, more vulnerabilities being reported in these platforms because, quite simply, black hat attackers, so zero-day researchers and black hat attackers are going and looking to find new holes because these are heavily used applications now. In the world of cybercrime, more traffic means more money, right? And that's what they're looking at. There's a ton of traffic flocking to these applications and platforms, and so there's more of a monetization opportunity for them. In terms of the vulnerabilities, the other thing that we're seeing is an opportunity for social engineering. Obviously, with these platforms comes a lot of things like invitation links, and links are prime opportunities for phishing, right? For phishing or drive-by downloads. I mean, pointing someone to a bogus domain that looks like a video conferencing platform, as an example, that just isn't, right? So again, say from an attack life cycle, same techniques that we've talked about before. It's just new flavors, and the new flavors, obviously, this global climate that we're in right now. Amar, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think video conferencing, as I told you, privately, it's like the gift that keeps on giving for a security researcher. We've seen a variety of attacks, and some of them are really basic. So we're seeing phishing emails for conferences. So if you have a video conference, do not publish your video link like externally, like keep it private. That's led to like video conferencing bombing, like Zoom bombing, where people are showing up like randomly on people's video conferences. There's actually a TikTok channel that like they show like a whole bunch of like teenagers getting on like all these corporate video conferences and doing crazy things. So first of all, don't go on TikTok. That could be dangerous. But there's all these other things. And then on top of that, just the phishing emails that you're talking about, domains that sound very similar to meeting domains, and they're malicious domains. And then on top of that, we've seen like just the functions within the video conferencing. So there's a popular video conferencing application where you could put in UNC links. Basically, a UNC link is a share. It's a Windows share. So when your Windows box tries to connect to a share, like an NT share, like a Windows share, it's basically passing in your credentials, your username, and your hash a lot of times. And attackers can grab that hash and then start decoding that or start using other techniques against that as well. So now they have your password, a domain password, possibly, like if your computer is part of the domain, and they've just stolen that. So don't click on links you don't know about in your conferences. Don't go to conference links that don't sound strange or are not published. But just remember, as a host of a conference, you can protect against that. You can do things like waiting room. You can turn off video. You can kick people out. So there's a lot of things you can do in your own conference software. So learn about that and learn how to take care of that quickly if that happens to you. But yeah, it's a brave new world with video conferencing, and I think we're going to see a lot more things because no one's looked at video conferencing in this detail before, and now there's more reason to look at it than ever before. And I don't think any vendor is safe that does video conferencing.
No, I mean those
are good.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's the Wild West, right? When it comes to the game of 0 days. So I always talk about a couple of things, right? When it comes to, again, going back to the attack surface, but a big problem is obviously the how porous it is, how many holes in this attack surface, right? And those holes are these existing vulnerabilities and newly discovered vulnerabilities like 0 day vulnerabilities. So this is actually a unique program in FortiGuard Labs. We have over 840 0 days that we've discovered since 2006. So we've been doing this for 14 years. We're the good guys. So we're the ethical hackers, white hat hackers, right? We do this because we're trying to beat the black hat attackers to their game. We're actually creating virtual patches within FortiGuard Labs. So this gets rolled out through IPS because we know about the attack before anybody else does, before a patch is available. So that exists there. But I'll talk about just what we're doing. If you look at the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, which is part of NIST, they track how many CVEs, so how many vulnerabilities are disclosed every year. And if you look year over year, it's just, it's increasing. I think it's almost 20,000 last year. And that number is going to keep going up. And that's the result of people that are just more automation that's fuzzing and trying to find these 0 days in things like IoT devices. Now we have the problem of medical devices as well coming to play, which are critical. And as Amar was saying, as he said very well, all these problems now that are in this brave new world that are happening with video conferencing platforms and so forth. So there's more eyes looking at it. There's more targets. It's not a matter of if, but when. As Amar said, as soon as attackers or any program has a new target to set their sights on, more than likely some vulnerabilities are going to be found. And so, yeah, I expect to find a lot more of those.
So with this home networking and remote working, sounds kind of scary. What type of best practices would you guys recommend so that people can stay safe in this new environment?
So, you want to look at it at two sides of the coin, right? So from an end user perspective, so everybody does their part, as we say, right? From an end user perspective, updates. These can be enforced, of course, through managed endpoint solutions, again, from an IT department perspective. These vulnerabilities are coming fast and furious. I've already started to see some fixes being rolled out from the vendors. That's the good news, because these product security teams are really looking at these hard as well. It's that war we're seeing out there, but updating. It's the same things we talk about, of course, making sure, especially now, that all these platforms you're using on a daily basis are always up to date. Following things like this webinar, following our FortiGuard Labs blogs, we put out weekly threat intelligence briefs every week, and these are updated things on what we're seeing, our security blogs, threat signals. This is a FortiGuard Labs response to breaking security events, so specific campaigns. So we give mitigation advice, what you should be aware of, all those things. It's common sense, cyber hygiene, as we talk about too, right? So this concept of cyber distancing, being really wary that, if you walk down the street right now and someone's 2 feet from you, you're going to try to weave around, right? That's the new normal. It should be no different when it comes to people approaching you virtually. Weave around, try to ask some questions, do things like access control, identity management, certainly make sure that you have secure connection with VPN, but also that you have a two-factor authentication, all these basic wins, right? That's mostly coming from an end user perspective. Of course, when we talk about solutions, there's a whole other side of the coin when it comes to, MIS and IT departments, all the way up to the CISO, how to manage this, how to properly roll out this sort of distributed enterprise model and really have essentially managed solution. I think it becomes very important right now, because otherwise, yeah, it's sort of the wild west, like I said. Amar, anything I missed on that?
Now, I think you covered a lot. I do want to point out and plug something that's passionate to me is that, you talked, all these techniques on how to raise awareness. At Fortinet, we've actually just released a free training for everyone. If you go to just training@fortinet.com, we have our essentials training that has a lot of awareness built in on things to look for, what attackers are targeting, and how you can protect yourself. And so that's good for anyone's passing time when you're in lockdown mode, getting some free training. But I think you're absolutely right. I think I do need to weave around people when I'm walking down the street, because right now, as soon as I see someone, I'm just yelling and running the opposite direction. But I think I'm raising some bad mojo there. So I'll start weaving around now instead.
And hey, so we've been Peter, we've been talking about a lot of the cyber and virtual implications here, but keep in mind too that there is, like I said, there's physical and virtual. There's often convergence of those two, so overlap and direct impacts. Especially now we're talking about healthcare and all that stuff. But Amar, do you want to talk quickly about? I know you've been doing a lot of research on the Darknet as well, because there is a physical impact to Darknet right now too, and things like illicit drugs being sold, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone's ever visited any of the darknet markets, the majority of things sold on these marketplaces is usually illegal drugs, right? And we've all known that for a while. But what we are seeing now is, and I think part of it has to do a little bit of people scared about their jobs, their economy. We have started seeing an increase in get rich schemes or scams, and some of them are pretty detailed on kits that you can buy to become an Uber driver and maybe fake out a Android GPS and start becoming a customer and a driver at the same time and start collecting money. We've seen more and more credit cards on sale. We've seen just more and more PayPal accounts on sale. So different things like that. On top of that, we're seeing more things that are just related to this whole crisis. Not only are we seeing people selling Clorox wipes for reasonable prices along with drugs, but we're now seeing fake drugs and scams and maybe treatment. So they're definitely highlighting on that. And then anytime there's a news article or a mention on TV that, hey, this drug may be being used possibly to solve this crisis or the infectious diseases, or it's being looked at, all of a sudden we're seeing that on the marketplace. People are selling that. Now, I don't know if those are real drugs. I'm assuming they're probably not real. They're probably sugar pills if you're lucky. Hopefully it's nothing that's going to damage or hurt someone. It's probably fake, but people are definitely taking advantage of that, and we can track the history of that. So some of the drugs that have been mentioned on TV and the research, we're seeing them go for between $300 US to $500 US per pill. And I think we have a blog article coming about that, detailing that as well on our FortiGuard website soon. So we're definitely seeing this uptick in darknet marketplaces on people trying to use scams and trying to take advantage of people. And then on top of that, I think the other big thing we're seeing on the darknet is people know they're at home, so we're seeing a lot of streaming accounts for sale, like Netflix accounts, Disney Plus accounts, just people stealing your identity and selling them in bulk as well. So look out for that. If you're using those services, make sure you have good passwords on those.
So don't go onto the darknet then, right, Amar?
Well, be careful. I would say, if you don't know what you're doing, hopefully not doing. Just FYI, because I know we have a lot of researchers on here. What I try and do when I do my own research is I try and use a separate laptop if I can. I'll even try and do a physical connection to an LTE connection, and I VPN in. Remember, the Tor protocol itself can be examined. I don't want my ISP necessarily looking at me using the Tor protocol, but so I VPN in. in on top of my research. So I would do that as well. If you're not going to interact, if you're just going to look around, you're probably safe. But remember, even basic ways of getting on the network, on the darknet, like the Tor browser, they've had vulnerabilities in the past where they've been exploited and people have been able to get on your system. So just be careful about that.
Yeah, and it's not just darknet; it's obviously also public forums too, right?
Yeah. So, the term darknet, I think, is definitely being shifted around. It used to be like onion sites or Tor networking. I think today it's a lot more encompassing because there's a lot of just websites that are out there, forums, just different types of places that they're not on the darknet. They're on the clear web, and they do require access sometimes to get in. Sometimes you have to prove who you are. You got to kind of get some credibility before they'll let you in. But they're not worried about like being taken down because they're in countries that are not really enforcing any takedowns or anything. And you may even be able to argue that it's kind of freedom of speech if you want, but it gives us an opportunity to learn what's out there as researchers. But unfortunately, it gives people, now that they're home, an opportunity to learn how to attack other people as well in a very dangerous way.
Well, it sounds like you two could talk to each other for hours. So it's great hearing everything that you have to say, but I would like to get to some of the questions that we have. So to start off, can you question, how has the coronavirus changed your job as a threat researcher?
So, I run our threat intel team, and I can tell you from a management perspective as well, it's changed our focus, right? I mean, we've had to really change things like algorithms that we're doing on the back end to really, like threat hunting is a big part of what we do, right? So threat hunting rules, as an example, we've had to adjust because we're specifically focusing our targets now because we know attackers are going after this. So that's, we're also actually working, as I said, I've created for over 10 years now our global threat alliance programs, everything from private to private sector to private to public sector, including law enforcement, things like Cyber Threat Alliance. And those are very active right now. It's actually good. It's a little bit of a silver lining, is that this is really, we're doing this in the past, but now we're actually banding as researchers, as really peers in industry. We're banding together even closer now. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've noticed that, and we're finding some good stuff. So that's one thing that's definitely changed in the last 2 weeks from an operations standpoint. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I would say, there's a lot more focus now in us getting telemetry and looking at endpoint systems. So like our products like 40 EDR, that gives us like some forensics pieces are coming into play a lot more than they used to in the past. Also, like just looking at cloud-based services, and whether there's video conferencing apps or, hosted services on some cloud providers. We're looking at more attacks, targeted towards that quite a bit. From a research standpoint, we've always had a lot of attacks. We've always had a lot of volume based on attacks. But you're right, we're kind of like just changing a little bit of the focus, changing a little bit of the algorithms we're using to give us more light on some of the things that we hadn't necessarily been focused on before, or like they weren't up to light or weren't up like in our faces before. But as a researcher, we've always unfortunately had bad things, and we'll always have bad things. So it's just like looking at what's what is the best way we can protect the people that are out there. What's the most bang for the buck we can get as quick as possible to protect our customers and the general public as well.
Thank you. So one question came in is kind of broad. How long do you expect this to continue?
Yeah, it won't end anytime soon. I think that's my answer to that. So it's a broad answer to a broad question, right? But it's, I mean, really, we're just so a couple of things, right? As Amar just pointed out, we've always had attack activity, and we've always and will continue to see, crisis or not, increased attack activity, right? If we look, you can look at our FortiGuard minute numbers we put out in our threat landscape reports. It's continuously rising. Why is it rising? It's rising because there's more endpoints being connected. There's more applications that are being created, more protocols, more ports, more bandwidth, bigger feeds and speeds, more devices. This is IoT, IOMT, OT now, right? All of that is compounding just the amount of sheer volume we see, right? And that's across the boards. That's vulnerabilities that are being attacked. That's viruses that are being, created and distributed, mass emails that are being put around, and worms that are spreading, and so forth. So that's continuously going to be a problem, just like crime has existed in the physical world. And crisis or not, we've been always trying to really flatten that curve again. We're trying to get it under control. There's a lot of good initiatives, particularly things we're doing with law enforcement as an example. It's a global fight, global war on cybercrime. We're actually also now involved with the World Economic Forum with the C4C, the Center for Cybersecurity effort, as an example too. So globally, that's going to continue to always exist. Our goal is to try to really reduce the impact, right? To make it more expensive for cyber criminals to operate. So that's the first part of my answer, and I won't take up too much time. But on the second part, it's when it comes to the current crisis, again, parallels to the physical world. As long as this is front and center on people's minds and in news headlines, we're going to continue to see this exist from a cybersecurity perspective too.
Yeah, I will add just a little bit of a hopeful message here, because I know we've been talking about a lot of bad things, but let's not forget, like, a lot of organizations are discovering that there's a lot of efficiencies now, like, when they're moving to the cloud, or, having a remote workforce, or having a distributed workforce. There's a lot of just efficiencies in, like, saving time, your commute now. You can put that into work or whatever. So I think organizations they're going to continue to realize ways they can make their organization more efficient, better as well. But at the same time, we're going to continue to discover more vulnerabilities and a new attack surface on that. So I think, Derek, you summed it up perfectly. We'll continue to see that, but we'll continue to protect against it.
Yeah, and talk about, I know it's all too easy for us to talk about the bad things that are happening out there all the time. And to your point, Amar, I do see a lot of good things that can arise from this. I mean, it is a great time to really wrangle this, and all the things that we've been talking about for years, decades, really, when it comes to patch management, when it comes to education against phishing and social engineering and segmentation, all these things that we've talked about in the webinar today. The good news is this is becoming critical. It's becoming front focus, which means that I think people are getting the message, and proper solutions are going to be put in. Fabrics are going to be strengthened, and that is a good thing. I mean, what we do today is going to have a long impact in the future on that war of cybercrime too.
Well, guys, we've run out of time for any more questions. We have more, but we just can't get to them. Do you have any final thoughts before we close up this webinar?
So I think I'll just kind of re-emphasize what we're just kind of talking about, is that it's not too late. And in fact, this is a critical point in time when it comes to cybersecurity, especially with this shift. So just keep in mind everything that we talked about. Again, I think it's just a matter of being cautious and having that mentality. All too often when we're in our virtual armchairs, there's in the past, there's always been a false sense of security, right? You can't be damaged, you can't be hurt going to while you're sitting in your chair having a cup of coffee. But that's absolutely not the case now, as you can see. So it's very important to always have that front in mind. This is the cyber hygiene aspect. Education and cyber hygiene goes a really long way. That's from an end user perspective. And again, just like everyone said, stay safe and stay cyber safe, right? And that comes to the cyber hygiene aspect. And then again, from a solution perspective, this is where end-to-end comes into place, particularly managed, with managed EDR to obviously all the way up to cloud solutions, because clouds are big targets right now too, especially if you're looking at, virtual healthcare and so forth. So those would be my recommendations. And it's not too late. I mean, there is a lot of good things that can be done, and that's the good news. The time is now.
Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us, Amar and Derek. It's been very educational. For all those attending, thank you for joining us. As I said earlier, this is a recorded session and will be available to you. Thank you for coming and spending some time with Fortinet today.
Thank you.